Hello and welcome to this edition of Middle East Now on I24 News. The headlines this hour. Israel in shock following the murder of 6 hostages in captivity. Their bodies were retrieved by the IDF from a tunnel under the city of Rafah. Several wounded in the north of Israel following an anti-tank missile attack from Hezbollah in Lebanon. And 3 Israeli police officers killed in an attack in the West Bank. The suspect has been shot and killed. They were taken alive and held by terrorists for 11 months. Then at some point during the last few days, Hersh, Eden, Alex, Carmel, Almog and Ori were executed by their captors, shot in the head at point-blank range. The IDF retrieved their bodies from a tunnel under the city of Rafah in Gaza. Our Emmanuel Honora has the story.
Israel's soul snapped just a little bit more after its military confirmed the recovery of 6 bodies of recently killed hostages. Among them was 23-year-old Hersh Goldberg Polin, an American Israeli who became one of the more known faces internationally, as his parents were at the forefront of the fight for the release of the hostages. Hersh was abducted on the 7th of October from the Nova Music Festival, along with 24-year-old Eden Yerushalmi, 25-year-old Ori Danino, 32-year-old Alex Lubnov, and 27-year-old Almog Sarusi. Carmel Gat, another hostage whose body was also recovered Saturday night, was a 40-year-old occupational therapist and staying with her parents in Kibbutz Be'eri on October 7th when she was abducted alive. Hostages released from the deal with Hamas back in November credited Carmel with being a, quote, guardian angel and helping them get through their captivity. Initial reports suggest the 6 hostages were shot straight to the head shortly before Israeli soldiers found the bodies in a tunnel in the southern Gaza city of Rafah. Deafening calls for a deal to save the now 101 hostages still being held in Gaza have now become roars of anger as the Hostage Families Forum and their supporters call for mass protests across the country. Some already started as early as Sunday morning, as Tel Aviv and other municipalities have decided to shut down businesses from 6 p.m. in solidarity with the hostage families. Protesters have accused Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu of foot-dragging on a deal that could have seen the rescue of all 6 hostages found dead Saturday evening. In a recorded statement, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu defended the lack of deal with Hamas, stating the terrorist group, quote, doesn't want a deal.
In recent days, as Israel has been holding intensive negotiations with the mediator in a supreme effort to reach a deal, Hamas is continuing to steadfastly refuse all proposals. Even worse, at the exact same time, it murdered 6 of our hostages. Whoever murders hostages does not want a deal. We saw the inconceivable brutality of the Hamas murders on October the 7th, and we have seen it again in the tunnels under Rafah. The fact that Hamas is continuing to perpetrate atrocities like those it carried out on October the 7th requires us to do everything so that it will not be able to perpetrate those atrocities again. Citizens of Israel, our efforts to free our hostages are continuing constantly. Since December, Hamas has refused to hold genuine negotiations.
Meanwhile, U.S. President Joe Biden also released a statement expressing his outrage as his administration has been pushing for a deal that would return all the hostages and end the war in Gaza. From pain to agony, the families who've been calling for a deal for nearly 11 months now see no end in sight as time keeps slipping away.
Well, the murder of those 6 hostages who were alive just a few days ago has galvanized protests here in Israel. Israel's powerful union, the Histadrut, has announced a general strike beginning tomorrow to pressure the Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, to do more to secure a deal to free the remaining 101 hostages. And protests are already getting underway in central Tel Aviv, where we now find our correspondent, Robert Swift. Rob, what's happening?
That's right. People are gathering on the streets. This is an event that has happened many times before, but there does seem to be an intensity and focus to it, perhaps as not previously been seen. Now, that we're standing on the main highway that passes through Tel Aviv. It's obviously closed at the moment. There have been, in the last half an hour, fires lit on the road, and it does appear that this protest is likely to continue and escalate through the hours of the evening. Tel Aviv police have said that they expect disruptions to traffic and travel off the back of this protest, and we may see disruptions in the coming days with off the back of the Histadrut strike. It's understood that many schools and kindergartens will be closed or opening at very reduced hours tomorrow. Today was due to be the first day back to school, but it looks like many of those schools will be closing tomorrow.
And what else do we know about the strike action planned for tomorrow, Rob? We're hearing the airport will even be closed starting tomorrow morning.
That's right. So as well as the education system, the airport is due to close. It's understood that will be happening from 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. That's in connection with the Histadrut strike. And that as the only entry, or not the only I should say, but the main exit and entry point into Israel. It's not only a big economic symbol, but it's also quite a symbolic one to Israelis. Many people talk about getting away from the chaos that's happening in Israel. A lot of young people that I talk to discuss moving away. The idea that the airport is closed will sort of solidify in many people's minds how serious this has become, how much the escalation between the protesters and the Israeli government has gotten to.
Yeah, it certainly will have a psychological impact on a lot of people. Rob, thank you very much indeed. Robert Swift there. He's down with the protests, which are just getting underway in central Tel Aviv. Well, let me introduce my studio guest this hour. Our very own Middle East correspondent, Ariel Osman, is with me. We're also joined by Lieutenant Colonel Jonathan Conriquez, the former international spokesman for the IDF and a senior fellow at the Foundation for the Defence of Democracies. And we're joined by Dr. Michael Oram. He's the former Israeli ambassador to the United States. Welcome to you all. Jonathan, I'll start with you. It has been, hasn't it, one of the worst days for Israelis since October 7th. People here really felt like they knew Aidan and Hirsch, Alex and the others, and now to deal with their murder is very difficult. But rather than bringing the country together in grief, it seems that the country is being torn apart. What do you make of it?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very challenging day. We're in a very, very challenging security environment. Had it not been for the massive news of 6 Israelis murdered by Hamas and their bodies returned, we would have been speaking about how the situation is deteriorating in Judea and Samaria and what's going on along the northern border and the multitude of enemies that we have. All of those are enough to cover many news cycles in any other country. We are inundated with lots of bad news today. Hearts and thoughts and prayers go out to the families of the bereaved. But at the end of the day, I think the thing here that's really missing is leadership and listening. Listening to the pain of people, listening to what bothers them and communicating clearly and having a plan and vision of leadership. I think that's what we're seeing of people responding to that. From looking at faces and the crowd gathering, I'm not sure that it has crossed political boundaries, and I'm not sure that we are seeing people from left, center and right out on the streets, which would then perhaps be an act of unity as opposed to disunity. But at the end of the day, today, we might see very tense emotions being on display. I only hope that the protest, whatever they do, will be conducted in such a way that they don't lead to any extreme activities, whether out of despair or anything else. That's my biggest concern. And I'm still very hopeful and faithful in Israeli people that we will get through this. All
right, thank you, Jonathan. And Dr. Oren, the Prime Minister has actually apologised to the parents of one of the murdered hostages. He says he was sorry he couldn't save Alex Lobanov. He's due to meet with the others as well. He is under a great deal of pressure now to agree to a deal, but can he go any further when it comes to a deal?
Oh, we can, but it's going to be increasingly costly for him. I just want to comment on something that Colonel Conriquez said. He talked about leadership. I think in addition to leadership, there's issues of credibility and legitimacy. This country operates on legitimacy. We go to war, it's a consensual affair. The Prime Minister is not the Commander-in-Chief. He's not the President of the United States. And what this government is hemorrhaging is that type of credibility. And so Netanyahu gave a speech today, you saw it, we played it here, that said that Hamas hasn't really negotiated earnestly since December. And I did my own research, and I can't find any evidence that Hamas has actually accepted this deal. And yet the discussion in this country is that Netanyahu rejected the ideal that Hamas accepted.
Obstructing a deal. People say that Prime Minister Netanyahu is deliberately obstructing a deal. Do you?
But no one can point to a time when actually Hamas said, we agree. And in fact, even the United States, the last statement that the Secretary of State made was 2 weeks ago, August 16th, where he said Israel accepted the bridging proposal, and now the ball is squarely in Hamas's court. They haven't made a statement about it since then. And so that's, as far as we know, that's where it stands. The ball is in Hamas's court, but that's not the discussion here. But no one's listening. That's the fact. The point is that Netanyahu could make a case saying, listen, hey, we were open. We pretty much agreed to the American parameters. Yes, we're making a case about this Philadelphia route, but that's the essence. Hamas is saying no. No one's believing that. And the big problem is that there's a chunk of the large segments of the Israeli population, and not just the people you see in these pictures, who believe that the government has not done its utmost to bring the hostages home, even if Hamas says no, because that goes to the legitimacy and the credibility.
So it's about a lack of trust. Ariel, yes. It's no secret, is it, that there is a rift between the Prime Minister and his Defence Minister, Yoav Gallant, and a lot of that disagreement is centred on whether or not Israel should give up control of the Philadelphia corridor.
That is the only open public rift, but we are seeing, and this is in connection to what Ambassador Oren said, that the negotiating team is leaking to the press. They can't go out publicly and say it because then it will tarnish Israel's credibility among the mediators themselves. But according to report and report again, citing members of the negotiating team, there are disagreements, and not only that, but saying that Hamas did agree to the parameters, even if not publicly, of the proposal on July 2nd. That included, in the first phase, 4 of the names of hostages who were killed, who were executed, we should say 2 to 3 days ago. These included Eden Yerushalmi, Carmel Gat, Hirsch Goldberg Polin, and Almog Sarusi. All 4 were expected to be released in the first phase. Now, whether this was a deal that Hamas had accepted and then Israel refused, or the other way around, at the end of the day, they were on the list, and the sense in the public is that the moment the Security Cabinet made the decision that they're including the Philadelphia corridor, no matter what, that is perceived in the public as coming at the expense of the hostages. Now, consistently, Israeli military officials have been saying that given the fact that all the smuggling in the Philadelphia corridor is happening below the ground, and the presence there only deals with what happens above ground, Israel's operation now is to uncover and destroy the tunnels. But Israel cannot build an underground barrier that will prevent further building of tunnels, therefore not requiring Israel's constant presence there. This is according to Israeli security leaders, all of them across the board. At least this is what they're saying publicly. This is the head of the Shabak, Mossad, Defense Minister Gallant, and the Chief of Staff of the military. That is what's bringing people out to the streets, the sense that these decisions are not made by for security purposes, but rather for political purposes.
And that is adding to a
credibility.
Trust.
There you go.
Jonathan Conrigues, I mean, these hostages were murdered at a time when Hamas is ostensibly negotiating.
Allegedly.
Allegedly. I mean, what does that tell us about their position and about the pressure that is being brought to bear on them?
Echoes the question that I just had on American network that I just gave an interview to, where he said, Hamas, are they negotiating in good faith? And my response was, there's no such thing as saying Hamas in good faith in the same sentence. They cannot coexist. And I think that, the Prime Minister, he is right, and I believe that we are dealing with an organization that is extremely brutal and inherently doesn't want to negotiate and doesn't want to give up these very precious bargaining cards. That is a given. And what he didn't say, and I think is very important to keep in mind, is that there's not enough incentive and pressure on Hamas to do so. Now, there's not enough incentive and pressure from Qatar and Egypt, two very important backers, supporters of Hamas. But most importantly, there's no real incentive, because I don't think that Yahya Sinwar is afraid so much of Israeli tanks. What he is afraid of is an alternative governing party in Gaza. And as long as there isn't one, and as long as Israel doesn't create that together with the Americans and Arabs and others, then why should he come out of hiding and why should he raise the white flag? He isn't incentivized to do so. If Israel would create such a thing, then the ground would start shaking in Sinwal's tunnels, and he would be more incentivized to do so.
Okay, thank you. And Ambassador Oren, I mean, does the Biden administration share some of the responsibility for this? The Biden administration told Israel not to go into Rafah, and that delayed the operation there for many weeks. Of course, Hersh Goldberg-Polin was an American citizen. Right. We have had a very strong statement today from Vice President Kamala Harris and from President Biden himself. But some people are asking, you know, why have they held Israel back when it comes to destroying Hamas? And why haven't they put more pressure on Qatar, this non-NATO U.S. ally?
The technical reason? The technical reason has to do with a very large Air Force base that the Qataris give to the United States free of charge. So what are the means they have for pressuring Qatar? Not many, not many. And believe me, I've explored them all, and it doesn't amount to tremendously amount to the United States. And it's actually a conversation that I had with the families of these very hostages, whether the United States could bring effective pressure on Qatar, Egypt, Turkey to do that. And then the answer was, unfortunately, the means of putting that pressure on are small. What I expect to happen now is that there will be increasing pressure from the United States on us, on Israel, to reach this deal, because the Biden administration and Kamala Harris as the nominee very much want this deal. They want to be able to go to the elections in November having a major diplomatic achievement. They want to say we put an end to the war. It's no longer about a temporary ceasefire. It's about a permanent ceasefire. And the American, every time Hamas says no, the American position moves closer to Hamas, not further from Hamas. So Mr. Sinwar understands that. And so we've moved from a situation where originally we were talking about a temporary ceasefire, maybe 6 weeks, with Israel's ability to renew the fighting if Hamas had violated the ceasefire, and Hamas almost invariably would. Now they're actually talking about the end of the war. And we're in an anomalous situation in the United States where both parties, both presidential candidates, are calling for an end to the war. Just the means for ending the war is profoundly different from party to party. Harris wants to end the war through negotiations, through a ceasefire deal. Trump wants to end the war by a swift Israeli victory.
Okay, thank you all. We'll take a short pause because I want to go to look at what's happening on the ground in Gaza today. Aid workers say a drive to vaccinate the population against polio has got off to a good start. Israel's COGAT agency is coordinating over 1 million shots of the vaccine in certain areas of the Strip. The United Arab Emirates has been one of the main contributors to that campaign, and we can go to Dubai now. Our correspondent Bastien Bory is there. And Bastien, the UAE really has been at the forefront of humanitarian efforts in Gaza from the very beginning. This is the latest step, isn't it?
Yes, it's the it's the result of several months of negotiations between the Emirati and Israeli authorities, as well as international humanitarian organizations, notably UNICEF and UNRWA. So these talks and these actions have been delayed, not only because of the military situation and the sanitation situation, so to speak, within the Gaza Strip, but also because of the rather strained relations between Abu Dhabi and UNRWA. If we remember, back in 2020, for instance, countries like the UAE and Bahrain had cut back funding for this agency for Palestinian refugees following the normalization with Israel. And this move by Abu Dhabi was seen as a response to Palestinian animosity over the Abraham Accords. But thanks to diplomatic efforts, this vaccination campaign finally began today, starting in central Gaza and then moving and spreading in a way to south and north Gaza in the next few days. And as you can imagine, all this is far from easy from a purely logistical point of view. It will include setting up a system to ensure that the 1 million or so vaccines are stored at the right temperature from the time they are manufactured to the moment they are administered. And with the absence of fully functioning hospitals in Gaza, doctors on the ground, including Emirati teams, will have to go basically from one hotspot to another according to a sort of roadmap that will obviously have to be spared by IDF operations on the ground.
I mean, Arab leaders from across the region are very quick to condemn Israel for what's happening in Gaza and express their solidarity with the Palestinians. The Emiratis are actually putting their money where their mouths were, so to speak, though, aren't they?
Absolutely. Hundreds of cargo planes, of trucks, of airdrops and cargo ships Yes, that's how much the UAE has sent and has been doing in terms of aid to displaced Palestinians since the start of this war. An additional aid is allowed to go through the Rafah crossing almost every week. Besides, on the Egyptian side, several water desalination plants, financed in large part by Abu Dhabi, have been providing hundreds of thousands of cubic meters of drinking water to Gazans daily. In addition to that, thousands of coats, pants, blankets, and whatnots have been and will be delivered before next winter. The UAE is also involved on a medical level, both by having set up a hospital in Gaza and also by having brought Palestinians' children for treatment in Abu Dhabi hospitals. And all this is obviously about politics as well, and of the pawns, so to speak, that the Emiratis are advancing to make sure they have a role to play in Gaza once this war is over. They want to extend their influence in the Gaza Strip, whether on a humanitarian, economic, or political level, in an area that the Emiratis have always had difficulty penetrating in the past because of their very poor relations with Hamas and other Palestinian factions there.
All right, Bastien, thank you very much indeed. Bastien Bory there over in Dubai. And Colonel Jonathan Conricus, terrible timing, it would seem, to start this polio campaign today. But this is the essence of Israel's efforts to really ease civilian suffering in Gaza. Not that it will get any thanks for it.
No thanks for it. And two things about that. One, I think Emirati efforts are commendable. That's exactly the kind of Arab leadership we need in the region, which is forward-looking, positive, and as you said, puts money where their mouth is and does positive things. Two, I think it's very regrettable from a media perspective. As you said, Israel gets slammed so much, many times unfairly, sometimes fairly, in the international media about our efforts in Gaza. This is a golden opportunity, and the only message that I saw coming from the Prime Minister's office was a clarification in English that clarified that no, this is not a ceasefire, and we're only going to allow a very select process of polio vaccination, instead of doing exactly the opposite. Yes, we, Israel, are helping to inoculate Palestinians in Gaza against polio. We're responding to a situation. We care about human life. We care about suffering. And that's why we're doing it, and we're doing it at a price. And I think that Israel doesn't have a lot of opportunities to improve its public image. This was one of them. The real work is being done on the ground by the IDF and COGAT and coordinating with different international organizations. And it should be mentioned and advertised in such a sense. And it's a missed opportunity that it isn't.
Ariel, another missed opportunity. And we have seen, of course, Israeli ministers getting themselves in a lot of trouble and actually adding to that case at the International Court of Justice when they have made comments about harming the civilian population in Gaza. And here we have, as Colonel Conricus points out, Israel actively helping inoculate the Gazan population against polio, and it hasn't been handled particularly well.
From a media perspective, on the ground, I would imagine, at least if the IDF's involved, that it will be carried out in a professional manner, in cooperation as much as possible with aid groups on the ground, because it's the IDF's job to facilitate it, but not to carry out the operation. That's one thing. And another thing is that a lot of these vaccines were brought into Gaza, but not through the Rafah crossing, because Egypt closes the Rafah crossing, but rather through one of the Israeli crossings.
It hasn't just closed the Rafah crossing, it has reinforced that border multiple times, hasn't it, to make sure...
Unfortunately, only above ground, not below ground, where the real strategic threat is. If you ask Egypt, they won't acknowledge that a single tunnel crosses the border, even though the IDF has shared footage of them destroying dozens of these cross-border tunnels. And this is just highlighting not only the challenges that Israel faces, but also the media challenges. Everyone is saying the Israeli siege blockade over Gaza. Egypt imposed the blockade over Gaza the exact same day that Israel did, and it's still active, this Egyptian blockade over Gaza. But I agree that this hasn't been projected publicly properly, also following the incident of the targeting of the aid convoy that was hijacked by Palestinian by Hamas gunmen, and also this wasn't carried by the media. Israel is indeed in a very challenging position in terms of public opinion.
All right, well, let's leave Gaza aside just for a moment. Ariel, can we get some detail on what happened today in the north of Israel? Because, of course, it hasn't been at the forefront of our minds, the ongoing war with Hezbollah, the Iranian-backed Lebanese terrorist group, but there was an attack in the north today.
Yeah, about 3 hours ago, anti-tank guided missile was targeted, directly hit a home in Kfar Yuval, one of the communities along the northern border. They were evacuated, but there were at least 3 injuries in this attack, one in serious condition. He was taken to the hospital first in Sfat, then, given the severity of his condition, flown by helicopter to Rambam. 2 additional injuries in light to moderate condition. This comes as every day almost there's another community along the border that is simply targeted by Hezbollah and their anti-tank guided missiles. This latest attack came in Kfar Yuval.
Okay.
Well, it's important to note that we actually don't have a defense against anti-tank missiles because they have a flat trajectory and Iron Dome is ineffective against them. We had hoped that the IDF had taken out so many of the crews that fire these missiles that the incidence of the firing had diminished over the last couple of weeks. The fact of the matter is, the IDF acted in a very aggressive way, 100 planes in the air, to interdict an imminent threat from Hezbollah against Tel Aviv. Okay, against Tel Aviv, not against the north. North has been under fire for 11 months, but they haven't put 100 planes in the air.
South has been under fire for 20 years.
They still didn't do it. It's Tel Aviv. So I spent some time up north. I was telling the colonel this in the reserves a couple of weeks ago, and in one of the local emergency crews that guard the kibbutzim there that have not been evacuated. They're actually beyond that line. They're there under fire every day. They're missing medical equipment. They're missing arms. They don't have any arms beyond small arms. They feel that they have been abandoned by the state, that the state hasn't lived up to its commitment, and that the army has failed to deter Hezbollah because right after that big operation, the drone and rocket fire simply resumed.
And many of those children, of course, won't be going back to school today because their families are having to live in temporary accommodation. All right, we're going to take a very short break. Thank you all. We'll be back after the break. We'll turn our attentions to the third front in this war. 3 Israeli police officers were shot dead in a terrorist attack in the West Bank today. Details next.
This broadcast is brought to you by Israel Bonds, the most direct and impactful way to support Israel. Invest now at israelbonds.com. This broadcast is brought to you by Israel Bonds, the most direct and impactful way to support Israel. Invest now at israelbonds.com.
Welcome back. It has been a terrible day for Israel, possibly the worst since October 7th, with the murder of 6 hostages in Gaza. It doesn't end there, though. 3 police officers were shot dead in the West Bank today, including First Sergeant Ronnie Shakuri, whose daughter, Moore, who was also a police officer, was herself murdered on October 7th. More in this report.
In the West Bank, one terror attack almost immediately follows the next. 3 Israeli police officers were killed in a drive-by shooting attack near the Palestinian town of Talkumia in the southern West Bank on Sunday morning.
This morning at 7 a.m., a vehicle of terrorists drove behind a police vehicle with 3 of our officers inside. They opened fire at the officers, then passed them on the road, and once in front of them opened fire again, before making a U-turn and fleeing the scene.
Police identified the 3 officers as Chief Inspector Arik Ben Eliyahu, Command Sergeant Major Hadass Brantz, and First Sergeant Ronnie Shkuri. Shkuri was the father of First Sergeant Mor Shkuri, who was killed in the battle over the Sderot police station on October 7th.
I've said this before, and I'll say it again. The right for life supersedes the Palestinians' right for movement. I'm going to demand from those responsible for the placement of checkpoints across the West Bank. We need to build checkpoint after checkpoint.
After the attack, the suspected terrorist, a former member of the Palestinian Presidential Guard, tried to hand himself in to PA forces, but was refused. IDF Special Forces later located him barricading in a house in Hebron and eliminated him. Sunday's deadly attack came a day after terrorists detonated 2 car bombs, including one in a gas station, in the southern West Bank's Gush Etzion settlement block. 2 soldiers were lightly wounded and 1 moderately hurt in the explosions. Overnight, IDF forces destroyed the lab used to make the bombs and arrested 6 suspects.
We will not let terrorism in the West Bank raise its head, which is why the initiative to go from city to city, camp to camp, with excellent intelligence, very good operational capabilities, very strong aerial intelligence support, and above all, with very moral and determined soldiers and commanders.
The chain of attacks come as IDF forces continue their large-scale operation in the northern West Bank. 1 soldier was killed and 3 others were wounded, including 1 in serious condition, in a shootout with Hamas gunmen in Jenin on Saturday, as attacks in the West Bank continue to escalate.
Well, the killer was found and eliminated by the IDF earlier this afternoon. Let's go to the West Bank. We're joined now by our correspondent, Balech Sladin. Balech, already a very volatile situation, isn't it, in the West Bank, and has been for many weeks now. Just bring us up to date with the latest.
Yes, the Palestinians are still reporting clashes between the Israeli forces and armed men in the city of Hebron here where we're standing, or close to where we're standing. And this is after the killing of one of the suspects in the attack this morning. By the way, he tried to turn himself to the Palestinian Authority this morning after the attack, but they refused to take him in, and that's why he tried to escape. And after all, the IDF forces could surround the house that he was in and fired an anti-tank missile toward that house and managed to kill him less than 10 hours after the attack this morning. And he also was one of the presidential guards to the president of the Palestinian Authority, Mahmoud Abbas, 9 years ago before he was fired. Maybe that's why he tried to turn himself in to the Palestinian Authority, but again, they refused to take him in, and the result as follows. Of course, the bigger issue here is that he managed to kill the 3 policemen this morning. And while we're talking about the situation here in Hebron, that is, of course, not separate than what is happening in the north of the West Bank, the ongoing operation in Jenin, that shows that the IDF is still working in that area after finishing their job, quote unquote, in Tulkarem and the Jordan Valley. That's part of a bigger operation to eliminate the possibility of threats toward Israeli targets in the West Bank and also in Israel proper, because of the what we're seeing recently, this huge developments in weapons and munitions, specifically in explosive devices by the militants here in the West Bank. The Israeli authorities see this as a possible threat, of course, and that's why they decided to deal with it. And the operation in the north of the West Bank is still continues for the 5th day in a row. That's again beside what is happening in Hebron right now.
Balech, thank you very much. Balech Sladin there with an update from the West Bank. Let me remind you of who I have with me in the studio this hour. Lieutenant Colonel Jonathan Conriquez, former spokesman for the IDF and now at the Foundation for the Defence of Democracies, and Dr. Michael Oren, former Israeli ambassador to the United States, and our Middle East correspondent, Ariel Osseran, as well. Jonathan, a very volatile situation in the West Bank and has been for some time now. It has been getting worse. How close are we to an all-out conflagration on the Eastern Front, and does the IDF have a handle on it?
Well, the IDF is definitely putting in a lot of resources. There's about twice the amount of soldiers and capabilities in Judea and Samaria than there are in Gaza. That's one. 2, I think we're seeing a deterioration in the situation, also due to statements made by Hamas seniors calling on the commencement of suicide bombing attacks, which we haven't heard in quite a few years. This was made out of Istanbul, out of Turkey. And 3, I think we're seeing a continuous Israeli operation, which in my mind is long overdue in terms of when we started it. And 4, and perhaps the most important point, or before the most important point, new tactics, explosive vehicles full of explosives, 4 of them in the last 4 days, luckily without major casualties, but 2 in one community and 2 at the Chizmeh checkpoint towards Jerusalem. So significant efforts here by organized terrorist organizations. And last point, I think we're not talking enough about what enables this, because we're looking at the result, but we're not dealing with how this is enabled. And this is because we're not controlling our eastern border well enough, and it's open and porous, and Iranian agents are shipping in weapons through Syria, Jordan, and eventually fueling all of what we're seeing in Judea and Samaria. So until we plug that border, I don't think that we will see stability and a decrease in violence, because they, the terrorists, have access to excellent equipment and weapons, and they're using it according to their ideology. Okay, well, on that note, thank you. On that note, I want to bring in Nasser Al-Amari, because Jordan's foreign minister has harshly criticised Israel today for operations in the West Bank. Nasser Al-Amari is with us now. Ayman Safadi criticising Israel today, but just how concerned are the Jordanians about what's happening and what we were just talking about here, about weapons being smuggled through their country from Iran in order to fuel violence against Israelis in the West Bank?
Hi, Laura. Thank you for having me. The king is very concerned. The kingdom is in a very precarious situation. First, you have the Iranian and Hamas calls for escalation from Jordan and the West Bank. And you have the perspective of the Israeli government reviving the Jordan solution as a Palestinian state. So the King of Jordan is dealing with a whole lot, in addition to a deteriorating economic situation. So the king is under a lot of pressure, and coming from Hamas, Iran, and the Israeli government. So right now he's trying to balance all of that while maintaining stability within Jordan.
All right, Dr. El-Omari, stay with us if you would. I'd like to bring in Ambassador Michael Oren. Jordan, of course, is a staunch American ally and very reliant on the Americans for aid.
And an important ally of the State of Israel in terms of our security, yes.
Quite. But do the Americans grasp what is happening in the West Bank? Because, you know, they're very quick to sanction Israeli settlers, but do they understand what is happening via Iran?
I think the word understand may be an understatement. They're calling on Israel to exercise restraint. If you look at the American press, you know, every time we go in and eliminate 10, 12 terrorists, it's 10, 12 Palestinians have been killed by the IDF. It's amazing to see that reported. And they're calling for restraint. I don't exactly understand what kind of restraint we're supposed to show if Iran-armed terrorists are building up a force in Judea and Samaria that can threaten our major population centers. I don't know exactly what kind of forbearance we're supposed to demonstrate here. I think that the major link between everything that's happening here, whether it's in the north, in Judea and Samaria, in Gaza, is Iran, Iran, Iran. And our approach has been largely whack-a-mole. Okay, we're going to strike back at Hamas, we're going to strike back at Hezbollah, we're going to strike back, you know, against terrorists in Judea and Samaria, but no one's going at the head of the snake, no one's going at the head of the octopus, including the United States. And the United States has massive naval and ground forces in this area now. And Israel's message should be to the United States that if you want the violence in the Middle East to end, if you want stability to any degree restored, Iran is going to have to pay a price. Because right now, Iran is responsible for all of this violence and hasn't paid a single price whatsoever. No one has extracted any cost from the Iranians. As long as that happens, it's just going to continue.
Nazir El-Omari, the Israeli foreign minister is talking about building a fence along the border with Israel and Jordan. What would that mean for Jordan?
Well, I don't know how many walls can Israel build around itself. You know, the Jordan, as I mentioned, is paying close attention to what's happening in the West Bank. The Israeli-Jordanian border is porous, and Iran is trying to destabilize Jordan. And by doing so, they're actually contributing to the Hamas's goal of destabilizing Jordan and using the Palestinian population in Jordan who are sympathetic to the Gazans and the people, the Palestinians in the West Bank, to create a more dangerous situation. The king is paying close attention to all of this. Unfortunately, the king is not very popular because the people of Jordan, whether they come from the east or west bank of the river, are sympathetic to the Palestinians. So he has maintained this relationship with Israel, including commercial relationship.
Has he seen his popularity decline since October 7th?
Well, you will need polls for that. And in Jordan, there are no polls, and you can't trust the media. And if you post on Facebook, that might land you in jail. So the king is trying to maintain the situation within Jordan, which is very precarious. But at the same time, he is hoping that Israel will stabilize the situation. But, you know, with the war ending in Gaza and coming to the West Bank, that is really what the king and the kingdom fear. And all this talk from the Israeli government of deportations, ending a Palestinian state, that means one thing to the king and to the Jordanians, and that is, you know, Jordan being the future Palestinian state. And that is devastating to the king and his diplomatic effort to maintain the situation in Jordan.
Dr. Nazir El-Omari, thank you very much. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Ariel Osseran, it would be a disaster for Israel if the king and his regime were to be toppled in Jordan, because they are, for all the bad blood between them, Israel and Jordan are allies.
I think what Dr. El-Omari illustrated in his interview is that you have the public constraints and you have the national interests that don't align also in Egypt and also in Jordan. You have the public opinion that moves towards supporting Palestinians and unfortunately also aligning with Hamas. And you have the kingdom in Jordan that has to, on the one hand, respond to that, not appear as if it's supporting Israel. On the other hand, just a month and a half ago, there was a massive raid on apartments in the heart of Amman to uncover these Iranian explosive sites through which they're smuggling, but also preparing them for smuggling in the West Bank. Same thing for Gaza. The Egyptian government, they cooperate and coordinate with Israel publicly, don't want anything to do with it. Any acknowledgement of Israel's military presence even in southern Gaza. And this duplicity, this duality making security business with Jordan and Egypt a lot more difficult. At the end of the day, we know that in their phone calls with the American president, both King Abdullah of Jordan and both President Sisi of Egypt carry a very different tone. I think until their public statements are closer to aligning with their actual actions in light of their security interests, I think that will help move the region forward.
Yeah, it's a very delicate and dangerous Middle Eastern dance, isn't it? Ariel, thank you very much indeed. Well, let's talk about the head of the snake, because Iran has still not retaliated following the assassination of the Hamas chief Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran over a month ago. And President Pezeshkian, billed as a moderate, has given his first television interview. In it, he spoke about economic concerns, but he didn't mention Israel or the United States. So what can we read into that? Here to discuss, Camelia Entekhabifard is the editor-in-chief of the Independent Persian. Great to see you as always, Camelia. Thank you for joining us. And we are used, aren't we, to Iranian leaders railing against and threatening Israel, but not this time. Why did President Pezeshkian refrain from talking about the war?
Thank you for hosting me. Greetings to you and the viewers. Masoud Pezeshkian mainly became the president to control the situation internally inside Iran. The regime was challenged with the ever biggest demonstration for overthrowing the regime during Mahsa's movement almost 2 years ago, 2 Septembers ago. And also the economical situation, all of them would cause that having Masoud Pezeshkian, the president, that's why mainly at his first interview with the national TV, he has spoken about the challenges the government confronting internally over the inflation, economical, and even he mentioned about the demonstration of the nurses, the retired people, and the others who were asking for higher payment. And he says he has spoken with the supreme leader to give him some funds from the national caches to can be pay some of those overdue payments. Speaking about the war which you asked me, and Israel and external situation is not in his hands to discuss those things. Those things goes beyond his power. And for example, just a day ago, Mr. Ghani, the head of the Quds Force, has a meeting inside of the foreign ministry with Bagheri Kani. That kind of the files shouldn't be discussed by the president. There are revolutionary guards in charge. And there is the National Security Council, which Ayatollah Khamenei is on top of it. And even if you ask the president, he would say, oh, everything go to the National Security Council, and I am a member, and that would be a discussion by a different people, which I have a vote among of those people. And that means the president is not in charge of all the matters in the Islamic Republic.
And Camelia, as I mentioned at the beginning, Iran still hasn't responded to the assassination of Haniyeh, despite causing major disruption to air travel and bringing more US military support to the region. Are they betting on people just forgetting about it at this stage?
No, I believe still they are very much keen to respond to Israel over the death of Haniyeh. But certain matters, as you just said, the U.S. Those particular ships comes to the Middle East, to the water of the Persian Gulf, and also some of the airplanes, which it never brought that in, like the B-52, all of them were mixed Iranians or the regime's people be little extra cautious to have enough strength to can confront it in case if Americans were want to attack them. And also the war in Ukraine was another matter to push this retaliation back. I believe now the world can be confronted another nuclear earlier war between Russian and the Ukrainian, as the Russia were seeing Ukraine as a total NATO, were confronting them. Perhaps there are more equipments from the Russian side has been brought to Iran. We heard about those missiles has been shipped to Iran by the Russians, but then later on Iranian denied. But there is no reason I couldn't believe that the Russia is preparing also Iran in case if it needed to confront the NATO. Iran has some enough equipments, and that equipment's also helping Iran in case if there is a retaliation between Iran and Israel, and American won't seriously respond to that, Iran can defend itself in somehow. And also the attack of the Israelis inside of Lebanon and the Hezbollah's retaliation was a little test for the Iranian to see how that war and the frontier can be extended in case if they were to go to the full-scale war with Israel.
Camelia, we appreciate it. Thank you very much. Camelia Entekabifad there from the Independent Persian. Jonathan Conriquez and Michael Oren with me in the studio. I mean, Michael, you know, a couple of weeks ago, Iran managed to bring the entire region not to a standstill, but it did cause significant disruption. The Americans brought huge military support to the region. Is that all going to be forgotten about now? Is Iran going to be allowed to just cause that level of disruption at any time it wants?
Yes. Yes, because as I said earlier, no one's willing to extract any price from the Iranians. Now, we haven't extracted any price, and I've had a long-standing disagreement with the Israeli policy. You know, we play by Iran's rules. Iran gets its proxies to shoot at us. We shoot back at the proxies. The proxies hide behind the civilian population, and we get branded war criminals. Now, why hasn't Israel responded to every act of aggression by an Iranian proxy by blowing up an oil refinery in the Persian Gulf? Why not blow up two? The United States, by the same token, Iranian proxies have fired rockets and drones at American bases in Iraq, Syria, and Jordan now 180 times. Fired on international shipping through the Bab el-Mandeb waterway. No price whatsoever. America has not fired one bullet at Iran. Now, if you're an Iranian leader, you're getting away with this. Why would you stop? And so it's never going to stop unless someone begins extracting that price. Now, Iran, they've got time on their hands, and I think if anybody thinks that they're not going to exact revenge at some point, whether against a Jewish community abroad, and they'll choose that target very, very carefully, as they did in Argentina in the 1990s, or against a military base here in Israel. I think they'll try to avoid afflicting civilian casualties because they don't want diplomatic fallout. But striking back in an Israeli army base would be perceived by a chunk of the world, by a major share of the world, as a legitimate response to the assassination of Mr. Haniyeh in Tehran.
All right. Thank you, Michael. Jonathan Conriquez, there's clearly no appetite in Washington to escalate the situation. In fact, the whole Biden administration's policy has been to de-escalate, but the results have been the complete opposite. Do you think things will change after the US election, whoever wins?
First of all, I totally agree with Ambassador Oren. I think it's spot on. That's exactly how I feel. And I think many at FDD, Foundation for Defense of Democracies, feel the same, research the same, and say the same, that until there's a price tag that will be addressed to the Iranians, they have no incentive to stop their actions because they're working. Now, that's without talking about nuclear. And Iran is, I would say, beyond the cusp or just at the cusp of nuclear capabilities, nuclear military capabilities. And we're so inundated by lots of things that are happening, the big pieces kind of get, they don't get a lot of attention. And at the end of the day, Iran is tormenting the region. It is tormenting the lives of Israelis. It is attacking Israel indirectly. And it is on a quest to arm itself with nuclear weapons, all of it in violation of international law, and they're not really paying a price for it. I think that, to answer your question, if we will see change, I think such change will only come if there is a leader who campaigns and says, I'm going to be tough against Iran and I'm not going to allow the Iranians to...
Are you hearing that at all?
I'm hearing insinuations of it, and I think that the Iranians would be concerned if Trump were elected president, specifically about that, because of the mercurial nature of it. But at the end of the day, if I'm Iranian looking at events in the Middle East now, I'm very happy and content because my strategy is working.
All right, Lieutenant Colonel Jonathan Conriquez, Ambassador Michael Oren, thank you very much indeed to you both.
Thank you.
Well, we're going to end the show back in central Tel Aviv, where large protests are getting underway following the murder of 6 hostages, including an American citizen, by Hamas in Gaza. There are calls, reportedly supported by the defence minister, for Prime Minister Netanyahu to do more to secure a deal, and there will be a general strike in the country from tomorrow. Our Robert Swift is down in Tel Aviv. Rob, what's happening? Are those protests getting larger?
Yes, they are growing. In fact, the scale of the crowd is now so large that we're having problems getting on the network, which is why I'm speaking to you about. At the minute, it's being reported that there are tens of thousands here, but there is some reports in the Israeli media that this may be the largest protest to have taken place in Israel since the start of the war. Again, no confirmation on that. But as I say, the crowd is large and it does appear to be growing.
And of course, as I mentioned, we are going to be seeing a general strike as well tomorrow.
Indeed. So what we're seeing here is just the build-up to the event taking place tomorrow. The general union, the Hispa group, will be conducting a strike, and many other organisations associated with that will also be taking part in that strike. Two of the most important being the education system, with most of the schools tomorrow due to be closed or opened very briefly in the morning, and also Israel's main airport, which will be closed from 8 a.m. tomorrow morning.
All right, Rob, thank you very much indeed. Robert Swift there in central Tel Aviv, where you can see huge protests are already underway. This country in shock and in grief following the murder of 6 hostages by Hamas. We will continue our coverage. Benita Levine is with you next. Stay with us.
Shalom, ¿qué me trae por aquí? la necesidad impostergable de 600 millones de hispanoparlantes que ahora necesitan escuchar el mensaje judío e israelí en tiempos difíciles. ¿Cómo lograrlo? Cuento con ustedes para continuar llevando a lo más alto del mundo mediático una inquebrantable diplomacia pública al servicio de la verdad sin concesión alguna.
On today's program, heartbreak for the families of 6 of the Israeli hostages who survived more than 10 months in captivity at the hands of terrorists, only to be executed by Hamas in a tunnel in Gaza in the past few days. Their bodies are retrieved from Rafah. The nation is in mourning. We take you to Tel Aviv. Another fatal terror attack in the West Bank. 3 Israeli police officers are shot dead on a road north of Hebron on Sunday. Israeli troops catch up with the terrorists, one of whom was a former guard of Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas. We go to the West Bank for the latest. And in the north, a Hezbollah anti-tank missile lands in Kfar Yuval in the Upper Galilee, injuring 3 people. The IDF responds, all on the same day Israel's defense minister visits a school close to the Lebanon border, vowing the price being paid in the north won't be in vain. This is the rundown on I24 News. I'm Benita Levine. A nation plunged into mourning on this day. Devastating confirmation that the bodies of 6 Israeli hostages abducted by Hamas terrorists on the 7th of October had been retrieved from a tunnel in Rafah in Gaza in recent days and had been brought home for burial. 6 funerals. The families of Hirsch Goldberg Polin, Eden Yerushalmi, Ori Danino, Alex Lubnov, Carmel Gut, and Almog Sarusi, hoping they were alive and that they would be released from terror captivity either through a deal or by a rescue operation. They had survived more than 10 months in Gaza, and just 2 or 3 days ago, as Israeli troops got closer, their captors shot them in the head and fled. More in this report.
Israel's soul snapped just a little bit more after its military confirmed the recovery of 6 bodies of recently killed hostages. Among them was 23-year-old Hirsch Goldberg Polin, an American-Israeli who became one of the more known faces internationally, as his parents were at the forefront of the fight for the release of the hostages. Hirsch was abducted on the 7th of October from the Nova Music Festival, along with 24-year-old Eden Yerushalmi, 25-year-old Ori Danino, 32-year-old Alex Lubnov, and 27-year-old Almog Sarusi. Carmel Gat, another hostage whose body was also recovered Saturday night, was a 40-year-old occupational therapist and staying with her parents in Kibbutz Be'eri on October 7th when she was abducted alive. Hostages released from the deal with Hamas back in November credited Carmel with being a, quote, guardian angel and helping them get through their captivity. Initial reports suggest the 6 hostages were shot straight to the head shortly before Israeli soldiers found the bodies in a tunnel in the southern Gaza city of Rafah. Deafening calls for a deal to save the now 101 hostages still being held in Gaza have now become roars of anger as the Hostage Families Forum and their supporters call for mass protests across the country. Some already started as early as Sunday morning, as Tel Aviv and other municipalities have decided to shut down businesses from 6 p.m. in solidarity with the hostage families. Protesters have accused Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu of foot-dragging on a deal that could have seen the rescue of all 6 hostages found dead Saturday evening. In a recorded statement, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu defended the lack of deal with Hamas, stating the terrorist group, quote, doesn't want a deal.
In recent days, as Israel has been holding intensive negotiations with the mediator in a supreme effort to reach a deal, Hamas is continuing to steadfastly refuse all proposals. Even worse, at the exact same time, it murdered 6 of our hostages. Whoever murders hostages does not want a deal. We saw the inconceivable brutality of the Hamas murders on October the 7th, and we have seen it again in the tunnels under Rafah. The fact that Hamas is continuing to perpetrate atrocities like those it carried out on October the 7th requires us to do everything so that it will not be able to perpetrate those atrocities again. Citizens of Israel, our efforts to free our hostages are continuing constantly. Since December, Hamas has refused to hold genuine negotiations.
Meanwhile, U.S. President Joe Biden also released a statement expressing his outrage as his administration has been pushing for a deal that would return all the hostages and end the war in Gaza. From pain to agony, the families who've been calling for a deal for nearly 11 months now see no end in sight as time keeps slipping away.
A devastating day indeed. So for more, we now go live to our correspondent Robert Swift. He joins us from Tel Aviv on the phone. We can see the outpouring of support there in the streets right now. So much pain after so much home. Robert, heartbreaking day in the country. What is happening now in Tel Aviv?
So the scale here, more and more people are coming into the street. There have been reports earlier in the evening that there was fires blocking the road. And the main highway through Tel Aviv is very much closed. Now, we don't have a confirmed number on the amount of people who are present here on the ground, but it's definitely in the tens of thousands, and it does appear to be the largest protest I think I've covered since the start of the war. There are reports in Israeli media that this is the largest protest, and I could believe that by the number of people who are here. It does continue to grow as more people appear to be arriving.
We know that the Hostage Families Forum is lambasting Benjamin Netanyahu for torpedoing a deal. That's their words. The Prime Minister is blaming Hamas for not agreeing to the latest proposal. Give us a sense of the temperature on the ground, what people there are saying right now. What do they want to see happen next during this very painful time?
Since the beginning of the war, there has been a change, a gradual shift in how political the hostages' families have been willing to be. It has now got to the scale where they have completely removed the attempt to be apolitical that was present at the start of the war. And now, for example, representatives of the hostages' families have come out supporting the Israeli Trade Union Organization. It will go on strike. It's called for a general strike tomorrow morning, and the hostages' families have come out in support of that. And that gives you a scale of the complete breakdown between in the relationship between the hostages' families and the governments, with reports today that one of the hostages' families refused to have any communication with the Prime Minister due to the level of anger at him from certain members of the hostages' families.
And Rob, you made mention of the National Labour Union calling for this general strike. Arnon Bar-David saying political considerations are holding up a deal, and most of the labour market will strike from 6 a.m. on Monday. Talk us through the implications, please.
That's right. So firstly, there is the education system where a large number of schools, it's expected, will either be closed or they'll be open for very brief hours during the morning. And secondly, Israel's main airport, Ben Gurion Airport, is expected to be closed from 8 a.m. tomorrow. And that gives you an idea of the gridlock that is has arrived at this point of the division that is present in Israeli society, where half of the country appears to agree with the Prime Minister that only further military pressure will succeed in Gaza, and the other half of Israeli society has very much taken the opposite opinion, believes that the attempt to put additional military pressure on Hamas will only result in more instances like what took place with the killing of these 6 hostages, and it's for ulterior political reasons.
Thank you so much. Correspondent Robert Swift, live from Tel Aviv. More to come from Rob in the coming hours. And now for more. Retired Colonel Dr. Jacques Neria, the former deputy head of assessment in the Israeli military intelligence and former foreign policy advisor to Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin, and Middle East correspondent Ariel Osseran are here in studio on a very painful day. Jacques, I want to start with you. Waking up to the news that Hamas had murdered another 6 Israeli hostages. It was raining at the time most people got the news. It felt like the heavens were crying as well. There had been so much hope, and this was the news.
Well, you're definitely right. I mean, I think it's with a broken heart that we are speaking about what happened with those 6 young people, and it's a pity. I mean, that finally, instead of reaching a safe haven, they were sent back in bags. And I think that this comes from the fact that I believe that their execution is something planned by Sinwar, believing and knowing the infrastructure of the Israeli society and its different components. He has struck on the weakest link in this society, and on the link that is the most sensitive on its nerves. And he has created a situation where it seems like it's the straw that is breaking the camel's back. He has provoked such an uproar against the government that in fact he may sit down now and just applaud and see, this is exactly what I wanted to see. The government is under pressure, and under this pressure maybe Netanyahu will yield to the American pressure and accept a deal with us. And this comes also after a decision made by the cabinet about the Philadelphia corridor, which is, quite, incomprehensible. We don't know why this decision has been made, unless it is all political. And if it's political, then the decision made by the Prime Minister has provoked, in a way or another, a reaction from Sinwar. And this is what we got at the end of the day. We are seeing the pictures of the streets in Tel Aviv, and I believe that these pictures are also seen by Sinwar and his company, and he might only applaud about his exploit here.
And Ariel, I want to bring you in before we get into the details out of Tel Aviv and what is likely to happen next. I just want to bring attention to the fact that red alert sirens are sounding right now in Khofesh up in northern Israel. That is a red alert siren up in the north near Lebanon. But Ariel, I want to bring you in on the details that are still emerging about exactly what happened. These 6 hostages were alive 2 to 3 days ago. It is just devastating to think how different things could have been, but they were shot in the head by Hamas terrorists in a tunnel in Rafah. That much is known. What else is confirmed right now?
Yeah, so that is the latest information coming out of Israel's health ministry, given that the bodies of the 6 hostages were taken back for forensic review. And in that medical examination, they really identified bullets in the heads of all 6, but also elsewhere in their bodies. They were found in a severe situation of malnourishment. One of them had signs of that they were tied throughout their captivity, but also injuries of shrapnel from October 7th that managed to kind of heal, sort of. This is the condition that the 6 were found. But as Jacques described, they were executed. There is no doubt about it that Hamas has begun executing hostages when people out in the streets protesting in favor of Gazans. And Hamas, at the end of the day, equating Palestinian prisoners to Israeli hostages. This is how Israeli hostages are being treated. Now, I think what's so heartbreaking about this morning is the news from this morning is not only that the families of the hostages and also us in the media have been warning that the time of the hostages is running out. Today you got a heartbreaking reminder, but what really enrages Israelis today, and that's why we're seeing what's happening now in the streets, is that the belief that at least 4 of them could have been released in a hostage deal. We're talking about Eden Yerushalmi, Carmel Gat, Hirsch Goldberg, Poland, and Almog Sarusi. All 4 of them were expected, were in all the proposals to be released in the first phase. Hirsch and Almog, albeit they were guys in military age, but because they were injured during October 7th, they were supposed to be included in the humanitarian phase. And the sense that this is the proposal on July 2nd, a proposal that Hamas had agreed to according to the Israeli mediators, but that's when Prime Minister Netanyahu added new conditions. That is what is sparking the rage coming out of Israelis. The addition of the Philadelphia corridor is a non-starter for Israel just on Thursday, basically choosing the Philadelphia corridor over the hostages, when all of Israel's military leaders are saying that the hostages are the more imperative objective to reach now. And so this is what's stoking the hard sentiments that we're seeing out in the streets today.
It also speaks to the evil, the extent of the depravity of Hamas to conduct the entire war, the way they have, the psychological terror when it's come to dealing with the hostages, and here at this juncture executing 6 young people.
Benita, I mean, what can you expect from these people? They're worse than animals. I mean, animals kill because they are hungry. They don't kill for joy, and this is what's happening. And we've seen that since the 8th of October. I mean, they have been massacring the civilians. They have been butchering. They have been decapitating. And they even sold the head of an officer, which was held in one of the families. I mean, this is crazy things. And now the execution, it's an execution. 1 ball in the neck and 1 ball in the head for each of them. It means that, can you imagine the scene of horror that all those 6 are witnessing, one after the other being shot, and knowing that these are the last moments of their lives? And this is really outrageous. This is something that you cannot accept. And certainly I say the following. I mean, I'm not surprised by their behavior, because I know that the day this war will end, and if Sinwar is still staying on his chair, you will see all the crowds just coming out of the streets with flowers and sweets, and just the singing high how victorious they were, and they will forget very easily the 50,000 they were killed, as they say, and the 100,000 that were wounded. This is nothing compared with the victory they have on the Israeli Zionists.
We're going to be coming back to unpack more of exactly that and some of the new details that are emerging. But of course, this isn't the only part of the country that is seeing terror on this day. We turn to the West Bank. 3 Israeli police officers killed in a shooting attack north of Hebron on Sunday morning. Palestinian gunmen opening fire on a police car before fleeing the scene. A double blow for the family of one of the officers. His daughter had been murdered while working at the Storot police station on the 7th of October. Middle East correspondent Ariel Oseran has details in this report.
In the West Bank, one terror attack almost immediately follows the next. 3 Israeli police officers were killed in a drive-by shooting attack near the Palestinian town of Tarkumia in the southern West Bank on Sunday morning.
This morning at 7 a.m., a vehicle of terrorists drove behind a police vehicle with 3 of our officers inside. They opened fire at the officers, then passed them on the road, and once in front of them opened fire again, before making a U-turn and fleeing the scene.
Police identified the 3 officers as Chief Inspector Arik Ben Eliyahu, Command Sergeant Major Hadass Brantz, and First Sergeant Roni Shkuri. Shkuri was the father of First Sergeant Mor Shkuri, who was killed in the battle over the Sderot police station on October 7th.
I've said this before, and I'll say it again. The right for life supersedes the Palestinians' right for movement. I'm going to demand from those responsible for the placement of checkpoints across the West Bank. We need to build checkpoint after checkpoint.
After the attack, the suspected terrorist, a former member of the Palestinian Presidential Guard, tried to hand himself in to PA forces, but was refused. IDF Special Forces later located him barricading in a house in Hebron and eliminated him. Sunday's deadly attack came a day after terrorists detonated 2 car bombs, including one in a gas station, in the southern West Bank's Gush Etzion settlement block. 2 soldiers were lightly wounded and 1 moderately hurt in the explosions. Overnight, IDF forces destroyed the lab used to make the bombs and arrested 6 suspects.
We will not let terrorism in the West Bank raise its head, which is why the initiative to go from city to city, camp to camp, with excellent intelligence, very good operational capabilities, very strong aerial intelligence support, and above all, with very moral and determined soldiers and commanders.
The chain of attacks come as IDF forces continue their large-scale operation in the northern West Bank. 1 soldier was killed and 3 others were wounded, including 1 in serious condition, in a shootout with Hamas gunmen in Jenin on Saturday, as attacks in the West Bank continue to escalate.
So for the latest on the ground, we go live to correspondent Balir Sladin. He joins us from Adora in the West Bank. We're just hearing this report from Ariel about 3 officers killed in this latest attack. But in a new development, we're hearing that one of the terrorists was a former guard of Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas. Is that confirmed? What do you know?
Yes, exactly. That is confirmed from the Palestinian reports. He was one of the presidential guards, actually, 9 years ago, before he was fired by the Palestinian Authority. And that maybe explains why today's morning, after carrying the attack, he went to the Palestinian authorities and tried to turn himself in. But they refused, actually. They closed the door in front of him, according from what we understand. And then he apparently ran away to that building that was surrounded by the IDF soldiers that managed to kill him using an anti-tank missile. So we're talking about someone who is not only from the Fatah movement, but also someone that has been very close to the president of the Palestinian Authority, and he is now affiliated with the military wing of the Fatah movement, the Al-Aqsa Brigade. So we're talking about someone who is, of course, not Hamas, not Islamic Jihad, not new, of course, but some other fractions are now joining the Jihad, the Islamic Jihad and Hamas in their targeting of the Israeli targets here in the West Bank and maybe inside Israel proper. Now, just in the past hour, the IDF, in a joint statement with the ISA, announced that after the following the initial reports, they can confirm that they managed to kill that suspect. An M16 rifle was located alongside him in that building. His name is Muhannad El Saud and El Isoud, excuse me, and he is 31 years old from Edna, the same city where the attack happens, just outside of it in that junction. So again, we're talking about a situation where the Fatah movement now, or at least its military wing, is being involved in more and more attacks in the West Bank, and that's why we're saying that the Israeli security branches are concerning that the situation maybe will go out of hand here in the West Bank. That's why we're saying that the Israeli forces here are on high alert. On our way here, many Palestinian cars were stopped by the Israeli troops. And of course, there were some examination to the cars themselves and talking to the drivers in order to know whether they impose any threat or not. So again, the situation here is, of course, very tense until now, specifically in Hebron. That's in addition to what's happening, of course, in the north of the West Bank, in Jenin specifically.
And specifically, as we hear Hamas praising the perpetrators of this morning's fatal shooting attack near Hebron, the one you are talking about, but obviously not claiming responsibility. Baligh, give us an idea of the solidarity, the support, the ripple effect between different Palestinian terror groups at this junction in the West Bank and surrounds.
Yes, definitely. Well, Hamas still holds the can be, of course, crowned as the most popular Palestinian fraction or movement here in the West Bank. Maybe even more. It's not maybe. It's actually more popular than in the Gaza Strip, and there's a reason why, of course, because of according to some Palestinian polling, we can see that even 80% do support Hamas, and probably if an election is held right now, they will win the majority. That's why the Palestinian Authority and the Fatah movement are not holding any more elections since the beginning of this century. So we're seeing that Hamas is gaining more and more popularity, actually after the October 7th attack and the war that followed it. We're seeing that they are gaining more and more popularity for obvious reasons. They see Hamas as the only fraction that is actually fighting the Israelis and able actually to get to some achievements. They believe that Hamas will emerge victorious after this war, but of course this situation is in the West Bank very concerning to the Israeli security branches because of the possibility that this popularity will motivate more and more Palestinians either affiliated with Hamas or not affiliated with Hamas to carry on attacks against Israeli targets in the West Bank.
Live from Adora in the West Bank, thank you so much, correspondent Baligh Sladin. And to that point, retired Colonel Dr. Jacques Nahir, the concerns outlined there by Baligh about the security threats that exist right now across the West Bank.
Well, Benita, you must understand that the West Bank is the soft belly of Israel. We have there 600,000 Jews who live in this area, surrounded by Arabs who are very hostile on the one hand, and then those Arabs are very close to Israeli centers. I mean, in some areas it's a few hundred meters where you can find Kalkilia inside Israel. I mean, it's nothing. I mean, remember the whole width of Israel was 9 kilometers, and the rest is the West Bank. So this is a very sensitive area, and this is why the army has deployed in this area right now. More than 23 battalions of the army are deployed there in order to secure some control, hoping that this will not ignite a third intifada, where we know that the northern part of the West Bank is being very active, and now Hebron is joining it, and this is very, very worrisome.
Very worrisome indeed. Gentlemen, stay with us. There is much more to discuss right now, though. We're taking a very quick break, but when we get back, our coverage continues on The Rundown. Stay tuned as thousands of Israelis show their support for the families of 6 Israeli hostages murdered by Hamas in Rafah in recent days, as protesters call for a deal to be secured. Stay tuned, back in a bit.
This broadcast is brought to you by Israel Bonds, the most direct and impactful way to support Israel. Invest now at israelbonds.com. This broadcast is brought to you by Israel Bonds, the most direct and impactful way to support Israel. Invest now at israelbonds.com.
The rundown continues, and turning now to tensions in the north. The Hezbollah threat remains. The terror group in southern Lebanon launching an anti-tank guided missile at Kfar Yuval near the Lebanese border, injuring 3 people earlier in the day. A helicopter flying them to hospitals in Sfat and surrounds. One is in serious condition and is undergoing surgery. 2 others are in good to moderate condition. Still in studio, retired Colonel Dr. Jacques Neria and our Middle East correspondent Ariel Osaran. Ariel, I'm going to come to you because earlier on in the show we spoke about red alert sirens sounding in northern communities. Start with that update.
Right, so we're talking about half an hour ago, a barrage of rockets. According to Lebanese media, they're talking about dozens of rockets that were launched to northern border communities, sirens sounding also in the Matat area, but according to emergency services, there were no injuries in this barrage. But as you referred to earlier, in about 3.5 hours ago, there was a barrage, or there was actually an anti-tank guided missile attack on the border community of Kfar Yuval. As Hezbollah chooses, it picks out its target, its border community, and then just launches anti-tank missiles at the homes. Luckily, the vast majority of these communities were evacuated, but as a result of this attack, as you mentioned, 3 injured, 1 in critical condition. He is taken to hospital. But coinciding with this, there was also a rocket barrage on Kiryat Shmona, no injuries there. And so if we're talking about an expected Hezbollah response, Israeli retaliation to that, we're back to the so-called wartime normal across all of Israel. And I think what's also interesting is that not only in Tel Aviv, but in the north of Israel, in south of Israel, people are protesting on this evening in the situation of war. That is one of the main causes that prevented perhaps some to take to the streets given the security situation, but that is not important right now for many Israelis who are choosing to go to the streets, whether it's north, south, central Israel, regardless of the threat level, because they want to voice their democratic position.
And Jacques, the Hezbollah threat.
Well, you know, Hezbollah, Hassan Nasrallah hopes to come back to the formula that he has staged in his last speech. He said that we are entering a new stage of confrontation with Israel. It is divided in 2. The first is the war of attrition, which will expand, and the second is the punishment that we will punish Israel of the elimination of Fuad Shukr. So we saw the elimination of Fuad Shukr, a big fiasco for Nasrallah, but from his point of view, in his speech he said very clearly, he called all the inhabitants, all who had evacuated their homes, to come back to their homes, which meant, in our view and his view, that this chapter was closed, meaning that he didn't have any more an intention of hitting Israel deep inside. So we are now back to square of attrition, expanding the attrition war, and hoping that this will be accepted by Israel. So this is where we stand today, and I'm not surprised. I mean, about firing rockets on targets inside Israel. But I mean, we see that he does not go beyond a certain limit. I mean, he has not tried to hit Haifa. He has not tried to hit Afula. The most southern area he hit was Nahariya and Akko. So on the one hand, and then Safed and Tiberias. This is where more or less the north of Israel is under Hezbollah fire, and there's nothing to there's no change. We are waiting to see what the Iranians will do, because the Iranians have not responded till now, have not responded to the fact that they claim that Israel Ania was eliminated by Israel and that Israel should be punished. Now, how? I mean, Nasrallah said that each of the parties forming this axis of evil has been given independence in making his own decision. So Hezbollah just made his decision and attacked Israel with the rockets they did on last Sunday, but Iran did not. And the explanation by Hezbollah people is that by firing first on Israel, Hezbollah has let the confrontation between Iran and Israel to be direct one, so that if in case Iran attacks Israel, Israel will not respond in Lebanon against Hezbollah. This is why this is the logic behind the fact that Hezbollah fired first and let Iran behind. Now, what sort of options do Iran have? Except of firing ballistic missiles and drones against Israel, which were at the time on the 14th of April were just counted by the coalition, the American-led coalition. They can use the services of a militia that are under their control, right, or they can hit us abroad. I mean, the embassies, Jewish institutions. We've seen that in the past. We've seen that in Argentina. So this is one of the options. And the fact is that the timing is still unknown, both to the Iranians and both to us.
Timing is still unknown, and as you are explaining, it's not only Iran or Hezbollah, but other Iranian proxies as well. The threat remains on several fronts. Gentlemen, stay with us as we turn back to our top story. One of the 6 hostages whose bodies were retrieved from a Hamas tunnel in Rafah after surviving more than 10 months in captivity was 24-year-old Eden Yerushalmi from Tel Aviv. Now, she had been working as a bartender at the Nova Music Festival and was abducted during the terror rampage on the 7th of October. She was described as a vibrant young woman with many friends. She loved the beach, playing paddleball, and was studying to become a Pilates instructor. You can see what a vibrant person she was just looking at those photographs. Now, at the time of her abduction, she managed to stay on the phone with her family for several hours. She also managed to reach the police. Here is a full recording of her last plea for help. Let's take a listen.
שלום ליה. אני בין כל היריות פה בדרום, אני חייבת שתעזרו לי, אני לבד ואני בשיחים, יש פה יריות וכל הערבים... שלחתי לך, אוקיי, תהיי איתי רגע, שלחתי לך הודעת אס.אם.אס עם קישור, תיכנסי להודעת אס.אם.אס. אוקיי, לא, רגע, לא שלחתי. שלחתי לך הודעת אס.אם.אס, לא בוואטסאפ. אס.אם.אס, לא שלחת לי, אין לי פה קליטות. יודעת להגיד לי איפה את נמצאת, באיזה עיר? בדרום. בדרום, איפה בדרום? תהיי בשקט, רגע. אני לא רוצה... יורים בי. אוקיי, לא לזוז, אל תזוזי מאיפה שאת נמצאת. תנסי לא לדבר, אני איתך על הקו, חכי רגע. אוקיי, בסדר. את יכולה לענות לי? מה? את רואה אותם? כן. תגידי באיזה יישוב את נמצאת, באיזה עיר? בדרום, איפה שהיה את המסיבת טבע. שהיה המסיבת טבע? אין בעיה. בדרום. בדרום. זה אלה שמדברים בערבית? כן, כן. יש לך אופציה לזוז משם? לא, אני מאחורי שיח מרחפן. הכל יהיה בסדר, תנסי לא לדבר. את שומעת אותי? כן, אתם רואים אותי, הם יורים לי. תשלחי משטרה, בבקשה. אני שלחתי ניידת למקום. בבקשה, אני מתכוננת. בבקשה, אני מתכוננת. שלחתי, איך קוראים לך? טיטי, איך קוראים לך? עדן ירושלמי. עדן? ירושלמי, יוש. את לבד? עדן, את לבד? כן, הם הורגים אותי, זהו, אני מתה. לא, הכל יהיה בסדר, תורידי את הראש. תנסי לזוז אם את יכולה. את יכולה לזוז משם? לא. את רואה עוד אנשים סביבך? עדן. עדן. הם קרובים אלייך? תהי בשקט. תהי בשקט. אני רצה לסיים. אני רצה. תהי בבקשה, אני מתחננת. אוקיי, אני איתך על הקו, תברחי משם. אני ברוך. את רואה אותם סביבך? לא, רגע. רגע. את עדיין בורחת? כן. אני איתך, כן. אוקיי, תמשיכי לברוח, בסדר? תנסי להסתתר. את בתוך היער? את בתוך היער? כן. הכל ממש לי. אנחנו צריכות לנתק את השיחה, בסדר? תתחבי, תמצאי מקום להתחבא, שימי את הטלפון על השטק שלא ישמעו אם שלצול ותישארי זמינה. בסדר? תמצאי אותי טוב. שומעת אותי? אני מתחבאת. יופי, ביי ביי.
Chilling to hear that plea from 24-year-old Eden Yerushalmi speaking to police on the 7th of October saying, I'm begging you, find me. Now for more, we welcome Daniel Sheck, the Director of Diplomacy at the Hostage and Missing Families Forum. He joins us from Tel Aviv. Such a devastating day, Daniel. You heard that call, that plea, and you too, like the rest of the nation, waking up to the confirmation that Hamas had murdered 6 Israeli hostages in a tunnel in Rafah, to think they were alive 2 to 3 days ago and then shot in the head, executed. One can't imagine what the families are going through. What can you tell us?
Well, yes, indeed. We've actually been dealing with this story and with the aftermath of it since last night, when the first details started filtering into the forum, and there is tremendous anger and tremendous frustration because precisely because of what you said, that these are people who just a few days ago were alive. They had survived nearly 11 months of captivity under horrendous conditions. And then here we are. And since we know, quite certainly that at least 3 of them were to be included in the first batch of releases, had an agreement on a ceasefire been signed, you can imagine what these families feel.
It's just beyond devastating on so many fronts, and it's not only felt here in the country, but globally as well. Of course, American-Israeli hostage Hersh Goldberg Poland He will be laid to rest on Monday in Jerusalem. His parents, Rachel and John, highlighting the plight of the hostages at the Democratic National Convention. In recent days, he would have been alive at the time they were making their plea. It's just unimaginable to think how things could have ended so differently. The extent of the evil is so difficult to comprehend. What is your sense of the outpouring of grief? We've seen the scenes in Tel Aviv just at the top of this hour. Tens of thousands of people going out. You were in Tel Aviv earlier. Talk to us about the range of emotions, not only in the country, but abroad as well.
First of all, I have never, ever seen such a mobilization in Tel Aviv. I mean, I left at some point in order to speak to you, to come to a quiet place and speak to you. But there were rivers of people streaming towards the central area of the rally, and I don't know exactly what is planned for the next few days, but I have a feeling that one mass demonstration won't do the trick, and that there will be many more activities. We already know that the Central Trade Union has announced a day of there will be people won't go to work tomorrow. There will be a general strike all across the Israeli economy. And internationally, I can only say that we at the Forum, at around 11 in the morning, we send out messages to ambassadors serving in Tel Aviv to say that we would hold a small ceremony at the Forum, and that 50 countries, over 50 countries were represented at 6 o'clock. Ambassador Jack Lew of the United States spoke, and a few family members spoke, and they lit candles according to Jewish tradition to honor the souls of these 6 young people.
Just beyond devastating. Of course, right now, it's just a day of immense grief, processing what happened, what could have been, and yet the question obviously remains that time is running out for the 101 hostages in captivity. What is your sense, realistically, whether we're talking about people abroad or here, who can put pressure on the stakeholders involved to get to some kind of a deal and to do it as soon as possible?
You know, there are not 150 different solutions. The protagonists are the same and the mediators are the same. They're just simply, all sides are not doing enough, clearly, because the result is that the term time is running out has become so overused. And suddenly, within the past few weeks, it has become so terribly tangible, with 12 bodies of people who entered Gaza on their 2 feet and came back in coffins. So suddenly this becomes so tangible, so concrete, so real. And I simply don't know what to say. You know, the families have a feeling that they have been betrayed by their own government, because they feel that not enough is being done by this government. Not enough sacrifices are being made in order to save these people. And as time goes by, there will be nobody left to save. And that is something that I honestly believe, you know, I'm now speaking simply as an Israeli citizen who grew up in this country with the knowledge that my country will do anything to bring me, my children, my neighbors, my soldiers, my defenders back from the battlefield. And here are over 100 people who were taken, most of them taken from their beds in their pajamas, and they are being abandoned by their own government. That is the feeling at the Forum of Families and of families of hostages today.
6 Israeli hostages brutally murdered by Hamas after surviving more than 10 months in captivity. May their memories be a blessing. Daniel Sheikh, Director of Diplomacy at the Hostage and Missing Families Forum, thank you so much for speaking to us on this very painful day. Thank you, Daniel. Still in studio, retired Colonel Dr. Jacques Neria and our Middle East correspondent Ariel Osaran. Jacques, it's heartbreaking and the pain is palpable, but I want to dig a little bit deeper into the concerns and the criticism around a lack of a deal. You alluded to it earlier, the Philadelphia corridor. There has to be a reason why that is the sticking point. The concerns have been raised by many that so much was being smuggled through that corridor, including weapons, including terrorists. And obviously it raises questions. Explain it to us as a security expert.
Let's put legends aside. Smuggling was mainly done through the Rafah passage, official passage. And maybe 20% of the smuggling was done on the axis, on the Philadelphia axis. So let us concentrate
under the Philadelphia axis.
And 20% out of 100%, which were done officially on the border crossing.
Right.
So this is the place. So when the government chooses to plant a flag in the middle of the Philadelphia axis, it's a political act in order to show that we are the victors, and it's not Hamas. And this is the main thing. As we did on the Palestine Square, we just erased the Palestine Square and put there a flag, an Israeli flag. And this is what drives Netanyahu and his two partners, Smotrich and Ben-Gvir. This is what they want. They don't care about anything else. They want to make sure that Israel is victorious. And it doesn't matter what is the price to pay. And if the price is those hostages, unfortunately, this is, as I say, unfortunately that this is the case. For them, they are dealing only with the macro. They cannot deal with the micro. And this is what's happening. Those hostages are paying the price of being micro and not being macro.
And Ariel, when we heard that call earlier from Eden Yerushalmi back from the 7th of October, pleading with police, find me, and we now know that she survived more than 10 months in captivity and was then executed. What does this all do to the psyche of the nation? We talk about the security failures. We talk about the questions that still remain unanswered right now. The security failures on that day highlighted in that chilling phone call.
Yeah, I didn't think I had any goosebumps left in me following that call. But now, even in your question, what's so tragic, what we heard that's how it started for them. They were taken to northern Gaza, and then for the rest of the duration, were gradually taken down all the way down to Rafah. And we know that they were not only executed, but they were in terrible conditions in their final moments. That was just the start of more than 10 months of nightmare that ended in the most tragic way possible for those 6 hostages. But I think it also raises or completely nullifies the rhetoric of only military pressure will bring out the hostages. That's what we heard from Prime Minister Netanyahu on day one. So far, there have been 8 hostages that were retrieved alive, and more than 5 times that were killed in captivity. These 6 were killed 2 to 3 days ago, no more than half a mile away from the tunnel in which IDF forces managed to rescue Farhan al-Fadi, to find, and in an operation retrieve him back to Israel. And so the understanding is that probably in that time, IDF forces operating in the area and the guards who were guarding these 6 hostages executed them and then fled the area. And that is just part of what has taken what, according to police assessment, are about 80,000 people protesting in Tel Aviv alone. But one last note about this protest demonstration and also the strike tomorrow. Some municipalities are striking, not all of them. Some of the big ones are Tel Aviv, Givatayim in the center. Kiryat Shmona is not. Ashkelon is not. Sderot is not. And that is part of what is tearing this country apart right now. It is literally being torn apart by communities who are protesting this decision and communities who are not striking. I think that is the unfortunate reality that Israel finds itself over 330 days into the war.
under the threat of rockets, going out to the streets to protest. Many are striking, but not all are striking. And this lack of unity comes at a time where Israelis are tired, they're suffering, and they're fearful for the remaining hostages whose destiny is not clear at this moment.
If I can add one sentence, I sincerely hope that this execution is not the first of a series of executions that Hamas is preparing in order just to paralyze Israel. So day after day, we've seen that with the Jews in Lebanon. Day after day, they were killed by Hezbollah in order they thought they would gain political gains from Israel, which they did not. And this is the case here. So execution after execution, let's hope that we are not in this movie.
And while we're talking about executions in tunnels, dark tunnels in Gaza, meanwhile, humanitarian pauses inside the Gaza Strip, a 9-day polio vaccination drive starting on Sunday morning. Ariel, explain what is going on here briefly.
Yes, this should have been pushed by all branches of the IDF and the Israeli government to show that even as Israel is dealing with this monstrous enemy, it is still upholding its humanitarian responsibilities, issuing a 3-day pause in the north, or designating areas in northern Gaza to facilitate this polio drive. Same will be 3 days after in the center, and then in the south, about 160,000 children expected to get inoculated in this operation that was facilitated through IDF Israeli forces, but going to be carried out by humanitarian aids on the ground.
I've got 10 seconds left. Jacques, if you were Benjamin Netanyahu, what is your next decision, briefly?
Stick to my position. This is Netanyahu. I mean, he will not change.
But what would you tell him to do?
Change. Yeah. Accept different terms. Just forget about Philadelphia. Forget about Netzarim. Let's get a deal done.
And on that note, we thank retired Colonel Dr. Jacques Neria and our Middle East correspondent, Ariel Osaran. And that is a wrap on this very dark day, a very difficult day. That's it for now from The Rundown. I'm Benita Levine, back again tomorrow, same time, same place. Thank you for watching.